Today's video is about what do we do with disgraced Christian authors, writers, scholars, ministers. There's been a number of these in the news, and it's hard to know what to do with them. First of all, it's tragic. It's sad. Like people who you've trusted, people who you've watched, people who you've read, like you find out about these terrible things that have happened, and it just breaks your heart that these things go on. We think about Ravi Zacharias, who passed away just about a year ago, and he was exposing himself to women, going to massage parlors, sexting, creating a culture that allowed him to perpetuate that kind of behavior for a long, long time. There was the Willow Creek situation of harassment that took place for a long while. That's been dealt with, but it was a pretty serious thing, and there were a lot of people who ignored the accusations for quite some time, which is fairly a typical thing. And you can read about that in Christianity Today. I don't want to misrepresent anybody in what I'm saying. I'm just pointing to some pretty well publicized cases. And we could point to some of the past. We could point to Gerhard Kittel, who edited the 10-volume theological dictionary of the New Testament. He was a Nazi sympathizer and an anti-Semite, wrote one of the most influential lexicons of the New Testament. And you have people like John Howard Yoder, who wrote a lot of books that were highly influential in theological circles on pacifism. And it's just like he was a serial womanizer who had a cover-up moving from university to university about his behavior that was very well known. Women were very much dismissed through all of that. So what do you do with all of this? Like, is this cancel culture item? It's like we just dismiss it and just say, well, just don't worry about it. They just wrote some good stuff, so just carry on? Or do we just outright reject what they wrote? Like, what do you do with that? Now, I want to talk a little bit about how this happens, why it happens, and what to do with their work as Christians. Now, the first thing I want to say is that this is not most ministers. This is not most Christian authors. Now, of course, everyone sins. No one's perfect. But in these like big cover-up, just horrible accusations and innuendo situations, this is not most ministers. This is not most Christian writers, okay? This should not put a black mark on all Christians because these kind of things happen. Why does this happen? And it really comes back to our human nature. It comes back to our psychology. It comes back to spiritual warfare. Power, money, influence, affluence, corrupt. Not automatically, not as a rule, but as a principle. It's like a lottery winner who just goes crazy. Well, they were already going crazy, just on a smaller scale. When they had very little money, they were already acting foolishly. And then when they got on a big level, they were acting foolishly on a bigger level. It just meant that they had more to leverage to have a larger negative impact and effect. The next is that power and influence can change the way a person sees themselves. All of a sudden, you take on another level of stress at a certain level of ministry, a certain level of popularity, that is very easy to feel entitled. It's very, very easy to make excuses, to rationalize things. They say, you just don't know how much stress I'm under. I was just trying to cope with my stress. By like undressing in front of women, by sexting people, by going to massage parlors, this is not normal. This is not acceptable behavior. You cannot rationalize or make excuses for yourself. People in these positions often just don't see themselves like everybody else. They just you just don't know what I've gone through. You don't know what it took to get here. And so and if this work comes crumbling down, this is probably one of the biggest lies people tell themselves. If this work comes tumbling down and all my books get discredited, all my work and ministry get discredited, you know how much damage that's going to do? Man, I can't really get into this right now, but I had an email exchange with a very popular Christian author who was plagiarizing. And when I brought this to light, it was like the most vicious assault or attack I've ever experienced through email, with all sorts of threats, all sorts of poisonous venom, trying to get me fired. And it was like, you know how much good work I've done? Well, I don't care how much good work you've done. This is wrong. You shouldn't be plagiarizing people. Come on, get over yourself. And he started attacking me. Well, how much good work have you done? Let's compare. This is crazy. People in these positions just don't see themselves like normal people. They're entitled because of the scope of their work, the impact and magnitude of the good that they've done. Then it seems to entitle them to go about doing bad things, threatening with lawsuits if things come out, and just being bad actors. So power and influence can magnify bad character. In Romans chapter 1, it says there does come a point in time for some people where God can just give you over to a lie. And so God can kind of say, you want to go down that path? Let's accelerate that. We're just going to give you over to that fully, and you end up just going as far away as you want to go. Now, this makes things pretty bad because it really makes people a hypocrite. They're acting one way in their private life, and they're acting another way in their public life. In their public life, there's someone people admire. There's someone who people aspire to be. And in their private life, they are just a train wreck. Jesus called these people hypocrites, and he had a lot to say about them in the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 6, 2, 5, and 16, Jesus warns the hypocrites, and he says, if you're a hypocrite, you've already received all your reward. When people praise you, when men praise you, when women praise you, that's all you're going to get. God's not going to reward you for what you're doing. In Greek, the word for hypocrite is like a play actor, where you only had say you had 5 actors for 20 parts, and the actor would come out. That's why they wore the masks. They would come out and play this role, go back behind stage, change masks, come out and play this role. It's like they're acting like different people. It's being two-faced. A hypocrite is a two-faced person or a 3 or 4-faced person. Public person, private person. It lacks integrity. They're not integrous. They're not consistent as a whole. Jesus had a lot to say about hypocrites, about two-faced people, especially the Pharisees. He called them sons of hell. He says in Matthew 23 in his woes against the Pharisees that the gates of heaven will be shut against them, that they will not be allowed in. Later on in Matthew 23, he calls them full of greed and self-indulgence. That is such a perfect description for people who do these kinds of things. Especially womanizers. Womanizing, it's greed. It's greed. It's self-indulgence. It's selfishness. I want that. I'm going to have that. I want her. I'm going to have her. That's just a horrible, horrible thing. And then on the other hand, like John Howard Yoder, you're writing about pacifism. You're writing about nonviolence while you're being aggressive to people who are under you in the guise of research. I mean, this is crazy. So what do we do with that? Do you stop reading their books? Do you stop watching their videos? Do they have nothing good to say? Now, here's what I'm going to say about this. I really believe that there's truth. People speak truth even when they're evil people. Even when they're hypocrites, they can still speak truth. But you can also find that truth elsewhere. You don't have to go to these people to find that truth. You don't have to go to these people to get the kind of help that you need in your ministry. I really prefer to go someplace else, knowing all that you know about some of these people. Now, you hope and pray that the people you do turn to are not doing this stuff behind the scenes, only to find out or not find out about it later. In Luke chapter 8, it says, what is hidden in the darkness, God will ultimately expose to the light. So you know this stuff's going to ultimately come to the light, either in this life or the next. So here's what I think. Do you use their writings or not? It's a personal decision. It's a personal, prayerful decision. And I don't think we should judge each other over it. So if I disagree with you, please don't judge me. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to say you're making a wrong decision. But here's what I think. I'm not going to use their work. I'm going to go someplace else. I'm going to listen to someone who has integrity and is practicing this not only on a public scale, but on a private scale. Oh, we're losing John Howard Yoder. Oh, we're losing Ravi Zacharias, all this. It's go find that someplace else. And if you choose not to do that, because they speak truth, there's truth there. You can find truth in Yoder. You can find truth in Zacharias. Oh, absolutely you can. You can find some amazingly well thought out arguments for the Christian faith, but that's not the only place you can find it. So for me, I would rather find it with someone who has integrity than someone who doesn't. Now, if you're in a position of leadership and influence, power, and you want to make sure this doesn't happen to you, how do you make sure this doesn't happen to you? And I want to give a couple things just really briefly. This is only going to take just a second. Please don't check out on me. That you can do to help make sure this doesn't happen. The first is seek out accountability, which is also saying don't be isolated. Sometimes people who do these things isolate themselves to avoid accountability. They don't form close relationships because if they do, this stuff's going to come to the surface. People are going to see the cracks and the flaws in the character, and that's the last thing a person who's doing this stuff wants to happen. So they remain aloof, they remain disconnected, they remain isolated. The third is know your dark side and temptations. Know what it is that you're vulnerable to and just avoid those situations. And last, at the end of all this, we just have to remember people are not perfect. We do not put people on pedestals. We do not idolize people. But at the same time, that is not an excuse to do this bad behavior. Some of this stuff is just atrocious. It was covered up. It was hidden. People were just silenced along the way. And that's a horrible culture to create and maintain from these Christian leaders. So that's my opinion on this. You're welcome to differ. Please let me know in the comments what you think about this and what you do with this. What do you do with a Yoder? What do you do with Zacharias? What do you do with these guys? And let's discuss that in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, I'd love for you to do that. Can't wait for the next video. Y'all have a great day, and we'll see you later.